Two of my friends and I had gone camping once deep in the woods. My friend, let's call him C, owned a log cabin. We made a tradition of going there for a week every summer, spending most of the time hammered and making fools of ourselves where nobody else could see. The camp is far away from civilization. It's a 30-minute drive down an old logging road in a small town. We have no cell service or even electricity. We either cooked our meals on the barbecue, or if we were feeling adventurous, we used the open fire. It's nice to just get away from everything and everyone else. On our second night, my other friend, let's call him Jay, suggests that we make a really big fire, high enough to reach the moon, he said. And we did our best, piling up all the wood we could gather into a small mountain and lighting it into a roaring inferno. C tried to roast a marshmallow on the blaze, but it burnt in seconds before it was even within a foot of the fire, melting and crumbling to dust. We were pretty drunk by then, and we started jumping around the fire and chanting like we were part of a cult or something, making spooky faces at each other, laughing all the while. When we finally tuckered out and sat down, the bonfire was dying down, and I could just barely make out a distant sound that I realized had been going on for a while. I just hadn't registered it under the blaze and the noise we were making. I couldn't make it out that well. It almost sounded like something coming from a speaker. That, or I was just really drunk and was mistaking the wind for something else. I asked my buddies if they had heard it, and Jay laughed. Hear what? Sounds like, I don't know, someone playing music, I said. Jay laughed again. Music? All the way out here? At what? He checked his watch. 2 a.m.? You're going crazy. I turned to the direction I thought it was coming from. The cabin was in a big clearing, and there was a really thick patch of trees to the left of it. That's where it seemed to be coming from, somewhere in the distance. I hear it too, C affirmed, turning to me. It's just the wind. It whistles like that when it goes between the trees sometimes. Messes me up too. I nodded. We packed it in soon after. The next night we didn't go as crazy with our fire, but we still kept it going pretty good. I didn't drink as much that night, still recovering from my hangover from all the drinking the night before had given me. We chatted and joked, along with the crackling fire. Jay started to tell a spooky story, but he forgot the ending at the most important part, and we were just laughing at him. Something tickled my eardrums. It was that same distant sound again, subtle enough that it took me a while to notice. I watched in the direction it came from, as if I was going to pierce through the trees and the darkness and see the source. "What's up?" Jay asked. "It's the same sound I heard last night. It really sounds like music, like a radio or something. Listen." "You sure you didn't drink any tonight? Who the hell is going to be doing that way out here?" C spoke up. "Well, actually, remember that little clearing we walked by when we went on our walk down the path today? That's a public camping spot. Now, not many people drive all the way up here. I can't imagine it's very well known. But I have seen and heard people camp there before. Still, they must be playing it pretty dang loud if we can hear it all the way here. Wasn't that like a mile down the trail?" I asked. "They probably think nobody's nearby, too," C said. Jay called it in early, and C dozed off once the fire died down. I watched the last bits of wood crackle for a while longer, listening. It was definitely music, and when the fire died down completely, I caught just a bit of it before it shut off, too. It sounded like some old-timey band song, but I couldn't be sure. I woke up C, and we went to bed. I remember thinking it was weird we hadn't heard the other campers during the day at all. We took a walk up to that campsite the next day. Nobody was there, but there were ashes in the fire pit and a beer bottle. See, just some dudes having some good times like us. Another fire that night. We kept it low and started to make s'mores. The moon was full in the sky, but the rest of the night was shrouded by a thick blanket of clouds. The fire crackled quietly around midnight when Jay perked up. "Well then, I hear it now." I listened. The muffled music was subdued under the fire, but there wasn't any wind that night. You could hear it a lot better. "They really like to party," Jay laughed as it grew louder. It wasn't exactly the kind of music you'd crank up and jam to. It went through total bangers such as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and some other old tunes I didn't recognize. The speakers were peaking as it echoed through the trees, interrupted by bursts of static. "This fucking sucks, man." Jay had to speak up a little. C was a little tipsy. "All right, this is just BS. We gotta tell them to turn that shit off." So we got in C's car. I drove since I hadn't drank anything. As we made our way down the path between the thick trees, the headlights our only light, the three of us were unusually tense. It was kind of creepy. What kind of guy plays kid songs that loud in the middle of the woods? Of course, I guess it could have been a family with a kid or something, but that loud past midnight? I know that at the time I had this really bad feeling in my stomach that was telling me it was a bad idea to go there. As we approached, the volume seemed to lower, but we could hear it more clearly. It was close. It sounded like there wasn't just one speaker playing the music. "Huh?" I muttered as I brought the car to a stop, the headlights shining onto the campsite. "Nobody's there," Jay said distantly. The camping spot was empty, but the music was definitely coming from somewhere nearby. That feeling in my gut grew stronger. Why was the camp empty? Where the hell were they? I wanted to turn back, but C got out before I could say anything, and he just started shouting. "Excuse me! Hey!" Jay and I followed him as he walked to the edge of the camping spot, peering into the thick brush. The moon was covered by the clouds, so I could barely see anything. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was playing again on what sounded like 4 different speakers at least. They were a little out of sync with each other. "See, let's go back," I started to say, but he pointed to something in the trees. "No, come on. I see his fire." Jay followed after him as he dove into the brush. "Hello! Hey, buddy, could you turn down the music, please? Sorry to bug you and all. It's just a little too loud." After hesitating, I went after them, smacking the bushes aside. I saw a faint orange glow cast on the trees ahead. I found it weird that they had their fire in there instead of the perfectly good fire pit. "Hello?" C continued. "We're from the cabin down the road. Could you please turn it down? It's really bugging us, and—" I was lagging behind a bit. C and J's shadows spread out from the flickering glow. I heard a subtle noise like running water, or people talking under the music. I tripped over something and nearly bumped into Jay. I turned back to see it was bottles and empty cans of fish where I had tripped. There was random junk scattered all around. "I see him," Jay said. The fire flickered, the light licking and fading across the trees. I could make out someone sitting against a tree, their back to us. "Hey!" C shouted again. He walked into the tiny clearing. "Buddy, look, sorry to bug you, but please, could you—" He stopped mid-sentence. Jay stumbled to the ground when he came up to where C was. I maneuvered around the big tree in front of me, just in time to see the figure behind the tree slowly stand. The full moon peeked out from behind the clouds, casting a silver sliver across my friend's 2 frozen forms. The orange glow in the clearing grew brighter over the figure, lighting half of his face in a otherworldly way. He was unshaven, probably unwashed. His clothes were all torn up and dirty, and he looked old, at least 60. His eyes sparkled with a wild glint when he caught sight of us, his beard curling up into a smile, and then he opened his mouth wide in a big O, and the music became louder. It was impossible, but it sounded like it was coming from him. C screamed, and I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to get closer, but I did. The old man's face twitched as a burst of static crackled from his mouth. He looked right at me, and I saw pure glee in his eyes. It sounded like he had swallowed a radio. The sound was coming from deep inside of him, from his lungs or his stomach. Old MacDonald had a farm started bursting from his throat. He chuckled, a deep, throaty chuckle of a chain smoker, and the music rose and fell along with his laugh. It was like the music was being played through a filter of his voice. The orange light flashed and blinked on his face, and his eyes rolled back in his head. It was then that I noticed that his feet were not on the ground. I shook my head and stared hard. He was floating, just a few inches off the dead leaves. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but when a loud crackle of static came from the right, I turned to the source of the light. I really thought I was having some crazy nightmare, that I wasn't really awake. J and C were both staring at it too, pure horror radiating from their faces, their bodies stock still. There wasn't a fire. I still don't really believe what we saw then. The source of the coppery light wasn't a fire, but a swirling mass of coursing shapes bundled together in a ball, floating just under the canopy of the trees. My jaw dropped. My eyes hurt looking at it. It was around 10 feet wide, and it didn't appear to be solid. It was like fire, but it wasn't fire. It was almost gaseous, or like a ball of electricity, I don't know. And it flowed with these shapes that weren't quite humanoid. They spun and swam through the ball like fish. I could hear them humming and chattering to each other. And in the center of the glowing mass of specters, there was a portable radio. It floated there in the middle, sparks flying off of it. And it would twitch, and you'd hear a loud burst of music come from the radio instead of the old man. I felt my eardrums throb, ringing, and I could hear, just barely under all the sound, the shapes whispering, the music in repetition, instruments and all. The three of us stood there, stock still, looking deeply into that swirling ball, I don't know for how long, completely frozen, when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. There was a barely visible thread or tendril of the orange light streaming towards the old man. Prying my eyes from the orb, I turned to face the man. He was slowly being lifted higher, slowly being pulled towards the ball. He laughed and gibbered. His eyes kept widening, then rolling back before rolling back down and widening again and again rapidly. His cheeks were twitching and his body hung limp, like he was in a state of total relaxation. Jay ran away. I fell to my knees. When the man came within an inch of the orb floating above us, his limbs hanging down like swaying vines, all the shapes swam into one point on the orb, and the old man's mouth stretched open again, wider than it ever had, and an absolute racket of radio static and music crackled out of his mouth, the shapes echoing it. C screamed again, barely audible under all this noise, and then suddenly the shapes all shot up straight, breaking out of the orb, and there was a huge flash of light, like a dozen fireworks had gone off all at once. For an instant, all noise ceased. I mean, it didn't just stop. It was like everything was muted. C's mouth was still open. I could still see it vibrating, but not a noise came out. The old man's limp body and the radio fell to the ground silently. I myself was trying to scream, but nothing came out. Then, gradually, like when you clear your ears after being underwater, the sounds came back. "Come on, guys, let's get the fuck out of here," Jay was shaking C, shouting. I was still frozen. The old man moaned something out before jumping to his feet with vigor beyond his years. His eyes were still white. He yelped something and pranced towards the radio, picked it up, and started running towards us with a big grin on his face, the radio outstretched like he was offering it to us. But we were already running away with everything we had. I got in the car, turned on the engine, and we were out of there in no time. We drove aimlessly, without saying a word until we came across a hotel and booked in. I ended up breaking C's shocks with how I was driving through the dirt road at full force. We went back to get our stuff the next day. We did not go by that camp where the old man had been, and we were in and out. We never went back. Sometimes I think it's just some crazy dream I had, but C will remind me that it was real. After we left, Jay never wanted to talk about it again. C sold the cabin for much cheaper than it was worth. He just couldn't go back there. Our annual camping trips came to an end then and there. Sometimes still, though, I have vivid dreams about that ball of shapes and light. They whisper to me, whisper things that I cannot understand. I still have absolutely no idea what we saw out there that night. Not even the slightest clue.